Legacy is a word that I love to spew about when describing influential games like this, and it's a word you are going to hear from me quite often in the future when we inevitably get to several other iconic franchises. And with the exception of Breath of the Wild in the modern era, Ocarina's legacy is absolutely stratospheric. At the time, a quick little history research online painted this bottom line picture. Nintendo 64 needed a banger, and Ocarina went nuclear both critically, culturally, and beyond. At least, that's how I understand it. See, my experience with Zelda has been unfortunately paltry. My gaming journey was a bit restricted growing up thanks to a strict household where my mom was not really a fan of games. So my game library was incredibly small. For the N64, the one pick that I was allowed to have, it wasn't Ocarina of Time, wasn't Star Fox, wasn't Mario. It was Super Smash Bros. So I completely missed out on this classic during its prime time. And I mean, yeah, okay, I played the ever-loving shit out of Smash Bros, but I did miss out on all of the great classics the N64 had. And in fact, I only ever realized that Smash Bros was an ensemble fighting game and not the original years after the fact. But okay, to get to the core of Zelda here, my experience with it, in case you couldn't tell, is pretty fragmented. And it basically amounted to this, and I'm going out of order here obviously. I've played the opening of Breath of the Wild probably about 3 different times, and I quit after 30 minutes or so, and I just wouldn't pick it up again long enough to where I would always restart and replay the beginning again. On the Game Boy Color, I played Oracle of Ages up until the 3rd or 4th boss when I was a kid, before I'd get lost and just keep wandering the same fucking aimless panels over and over again, and I turned the game off feeling like I wasted my time. Later on though, once I got a GameCube as a kid, I did play Wind Waker. I was turned off by the art style at first, thinking I might have made a mistake or picked up an off-brand Zelda game, only to realize that Wind Waker was actually one of the coolest and most fun games I had ever played up until that point. Unfortunately, I did not beat it. I'd gotten just far enough with some fire and ice arrows in some later dungeon before I had to return the game back to Blockbuster, so I never really got to finish that chapter of my Zelda journey, unfortunately. Now, my fragmented experience with the Zelda franchise didn't really set me up for success. I did eventually go back and I did play Link to the Past and the remastered Link's Awakening on the Switch. I did love both of those, but I promise you, I really went into this with an open mind and an open heart. I did my absolute damnedest not to overhype the game. Now, when I started up the game, I did try to make it as authentic as possible. I took an off-brand Amazon N64 controller and I plugged the USB port into my Nintendo Switch to play Ocarina through its N64 Switch Online app. Unfortunately, the C buttons on the controller would conflict with the Switch interface, and after an hour or so, I had to ditch it and just try to play with the Pro controller, which was sad, but not a deal breaker. What was a deal breaker though was that I was getting weirdly motion sick and overall just queasy, feeling unpleasant looking at the browns and greens in the game. I know this is going to sound weird, and I'm sorry, I really am, but I can't really do anything about that. But don't worry, I did have a failsafe. I had one copy of A Link Between Worlds for, way down the line, one copy of Majora's Mask 3D, and a copy of Ocarina for the 3DS, so I brushed the dust off my 2DS XL, which is insanely underrated by the way, popped the cartridge in, and immediately my eyes thanked me. Now I could play the game without 1, my roommate backseat gaming, and 2, without feeling motion sick. So it was a true win-win. Right off the bat, all that legacy I talked about earlier came through like trumpets splitting my ears and brain in half in the form of beauty and intimidation and magic. I'm talking about the literal title sequence in the opening music, dude. Like Link's horse Epona clomping away as she galloped, and that sweet ocarina sound literally made my eyes tears up. So this was what I was missing. This was what I starved myself from all these years. Shame on me. Not even letting me breathe, I met with another beautiful song as I began to create my name in the character screen, and here I was spending about 5 to 10 minutes just listening to the music in disbelief. I had heard snippets and fragments of Zelda melodies throughout my life, but I never knew that this was the origin for so many of these songs. The decision to pivot to the 3DS port was the best decision for me. The overhauled visuals, despite not being the strongest part of the game, were very pleasant, and it let me focus on the gameplay itself without getting distracted, or worse, ill. I roamed the Kokiri forest, getting lost in certain maze-like sections. I stumbled on a giant fucking tree that just died after talking like Shakespeare. I had my fairy keep screaming at me, "Hey, and listen. But I absolutely did not listen and instead took my sweet time running around every nook and cranny, talking to all the NPCs and random people, roaming the Hyrule Town Market or various shops and back alleys. I went to temples, I went to villages I wasn't meant to go to yet, and I felt a lot of satisfaction outsmarting guards by myself and navigating puzzles to meet new characters that would push my story forward. Playing Ocarina was the best way for me to realize that literally every single adventure RPG game I had ever played basically kissed the ring on Nintendo's finger and the Don himself, Miyamoto. One quick scroll on Wikipedia after I had beaten the game and a lot of my suspicions turned out to be true, although I didn't know specifically just what exactly Ocarina had pioneered. But I knew there was no way that future games did not borrow influence from Ocarina, because there's no way, right? Without the context though of the historic blueprint Ocarina laid out for future games, the land of Hyrule was fascinating for a solid amount of time. Tying gameplay mechanics into the Ocarina's various melodies was an awesome method of crafting what were essentially power-ups if you think about it, while moonlighting as a way to progress the main story. The ability to swap between day and night to warp to the various temples or to spawn time blocks to help navigate dungeons, these are all synergetic skill-up moments that lead to a pretty solid flow state of understanding your toolkit, but still being pleasantly surprised in the moment whenever your instincts prove to be the solution to a particularly trying puzzle. The enemies and boss fights felt varied but pretty simple, although that didn't really bother me. I did appreciate the game attempting to teach you how to move things along in what I like to call the language of Zelda. For example, if you stumbled on an area that seems inaccessible, there is usually a story reason, or an item reason, with the two being pretty intertwined at times. The game is open enough for you to take your time and explore around a bit, with a keen eye set on what certain NPCs might say as they try to nudge you in the right direction. Now personally, I did not find things clear enough, but at the very least I understood that there was something I needed to look for. If I was wandering around aimlessly for what felt like forever, then maybe I was approaching the room I was in the wrong way, and I should try one of my Ocarina songs or look for telltale signs of something that indicates I needed to unlock a particular item in that dungeon first. Maybe it was a pair of heavy boots or a grapple hook, or maybe there was nothing else other than to see if there was anything cool that I could stash. But nevertheless, there is an element of wonder and adventure and overall magic in Hyrule that made me so upset I wasn't a kid in the 90s trying to find my way around, because the magic is most definitely all over the game's DNA. But unfortunately, there is very little of that magic that felt significant to my old self in 2024. For all of the superb design, direction, art styles, gameplay mechanics, and every other plethora of creative choices poured into this game, the modern era we are currently in acts as a huge sifting container, allowing only a fraction of that magic to be felt. Now, before you scream at me in the comments, all I can say is, I feel your pain. I know the game was fantastic when it came out, and I understand why it's heralded as one of the best, and I'm going to apologize to you now in advance for everything else I'm about to say, but it would be a disservice for me to lie to you and tell you everything was peachy keen for me, because it really wasn't. To start off, the Achilles heel of Zelda is that by today's standard, the core pillar holding it afloat, to me, is the power of nostalgia. From what I can gather, the strongest pro Ocarina fans are extremely passionate, and I do respect that passion, but it seems like y'all can't seem to take off your rose-tinted lenses. Whereas for me, it is unfortunately impossible to judge the game without my own 2024 tinted lenses. If you follow me so far, what I mean is, the game is a product of its time, and time is undefeated when it comes to decaying everything around it. Then there's the land of Hyrule itself. Besides some pretty eerie locales as Adult Link, as well as an interesting lake and a desert fortress full of female ninjas, a lot of Hyrule is incredibly dull, and in the case of Hyrule Field, almost totally empty. Let's put it like this. Before I learned the song that let me keep the overworld into perpetual daytime, running through Hyrule Field felt like traversing a cave or tall grass in Pokemon and just constantly being spammed by Zubats and Pidgeys, which is super grating after the umpteenth time. As for the puzzles and exploration, and I have a sneaking suspicion this is a legitimate theory because of how games, tended to be designed in the 80s and 90s, but Ocarina of Time felt like it was meant to be purchased with like an official strategy guide. I don't dislike walkthroughs and guides, I made a career out of them at GameSpot, and I used to scour the GameFAQ walkthroughs for all sorts of games growing up. Plus, as a 90s kid, swapping tips and stories and rumors on the playgrounds at school was a legitimate thing. If you were stuck on an area, you just had to mention it, and some kid on the kickball field at Foursquare Court who had happened to have beaten that section for whatever reason would be able to explain to you what you missed. Now, the reason I say that this game seemed to need a strategy guide is because at times it would defy its own logic, much to my frustration. As of writing this script, I had finished my time with Ocarina about 3 months prior, so a lot of my memories of the game are a little hazy, and I apologize for that. And unfortunately, I did not capture any gameplay because I had played on the 3DS and not on the Switch's N64 app. So I'm going off of pure memory here. But there was a distinct moment where I almost closed the game out of exasperation, and it involved, I want to say, trying to either melt an area or to light a torch on fire. In an earlier section in the game, there was a little mini puzzle where the only way you could light a particular torch was by shooting an arrow through a ball of fire. Now, at the time, I remember thinking this was super clever, and I put it in the back of my head in case I had to use it again. Now fast forward to, I want to say, maybe Lake Hylia, but everything was super icy and frozen, and voila, here was another torch or something that had to be lit. So I painstakingly get myself into position across the slippery ice, and I shoot my arrow through some fire, just for it to not work? Backtracking once, twice, 3 times, and even more, and nothing was changing. Exploring other nooks and crannies, and just no dice. Eventually, I finally threw my hands up and looked at a guide, and wow, okay. Rather than being rewarded for my creative thinking that had literally worked in a similar situation earlier in the game, I was punished arbitrarily because of some random key item. Which, speaking of key items, and this was one of the only but still a significant issue I had with Link to the Past, certain key items feel f***ing impossible to find and are not in an intuitive spot, but rather way off the beaten path, which means that I'm stuck without any ability to progress naturally and am once again forced to rely on online walkthroughs. I believe I had finished the 5th or 6th stage before I said, you know what, enough. I'm just going to use this walkthrough for the rest of the game. Because I had grown exhausted, fumbling over the same areas. And on this note too, the lack of leisure time that I had with this game was another frustrating point. The closer I felt to the end, the more I just wanted to be done with it. And this is the troubling trend I'm noticing, because we're on episode 3 right now, and I did feel this exact same way with both Dead Space and Resident Evil 7, so it's my promise to you guys that I'll try and not let it affect my enjoyment of future games, because it does suck, man. And I can't fault the game for that, when it's very clearly a me problem, so, you know, one step at a time. But here's what I will fault the game on though, and that's the story and the characters were fucking boring. That stupid princess, dude. Oh my god. She actually really sucked. And I did not like a single character or side character other than certain friends and a few kind faces of Links who were less of a pain in my ass and more of a soothing presence. The unskippable cutscenes also felt like a slog after I saw them once, but nothing infuriated me more than fucking up and asking that owl to repeat the monologue it had just said and being unable to skip all the jargon once more. The biggest tragedy is that I did not care to finish the game. I got all the way until the second to last temple with the female ninjas, and about midway through I finally said, you know what, I don't think I like this enough to keep playing. And I just watched the rest of the game on a YouTube walkthrough so I can move on to Majora's Mask. And again, man, I am so sorry. I know this game is really precious to a lot of you, and I really wanted to like it. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it to click with me. I'm hoping with all my heart that I will like Majora's Mask. Almost everyone I've talked to, by the way, whose opinions I respect, the vast majority of them were convinced that I would like Majora's Mask more, and that is genuinely exciting. I'm hoping Majora's will catch me off guard in the best way, and although Ocarina was clearly not the game for me, I need you to know that I still respect the game all the same for what it achieved at the time and what it means to you all. Until next time.